She was 16 years old, wearing a vintage oversized hoodie and sitting in seat 2A. To the woman beside her, she looked like a thug. To the air marshal down the aisle, she looked like a suspect. But to the man waiting on the tarmac, a man with the power to end careers with a single signature, she was the most important person in the world. They thought they could bully her. They thought they could slap cuffs on her wrists and drag her off the plane to teach her a lesson. They were wrong. When the truth came out, it didn't just silence the cabin. It shut down the entire airport. This is the story of how one corrupt cop made the biggest mistake of his life. The first-class cabin of flight RA-492 from Chicago to Los Angeles smelled of lavender-hot towels and old money. It was a space designed for silence, for executives burying their heads in spreadsheets and socialites nursing mimosas before noon. Jordan Banks, 16 years old and currently drowning in a slightly battered navy blue hoodie, adjusted her noise-cancelling headphones. She didn't fit the aesthetic. She knew it. The flight attendant, a kind woman named Sarah with tired eyes, had smiled warmly when Jordan boarded, but the other passengers weren't as subtle. They stared. Jordan pulled her legs up, trying to make herself smaller in the wide leather seat. She was exhausted. Her father Harrison had booked the ticket last minute. "I need you in LA for the ceremony, Geordie." He'd said, his voice crackling over the phone. "I can't accept this without my girl there. First class straight through. I'll meet you at the gate." She missed him. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized, and he'd moved out west for the new appointment. This trip was supposed to be a celebration. "Excuse me," a sharp voice cut through Jordan's playlist. Jordan slid one ear cup back. "Yes." Standing in this aisle was a woman who looked like she had been shrink-wrapped in Chanel. She had blonde hair sprayed into a helmet of perfection, and her fingers were adorned with enough jewelry to anchor a small boat. This was Mrs. Tricia Sterling. "You are in my seat's vicinity," Tricia said, gesturing vaguely at the overhead bin Jordan had just closed. "And I have fragile items. I hope you didn't shove that backpack of yours against my Louis Vuitton." "I was careful," Jordan said softly. "There was plenty of room." Tricia huffed a sound of pure derision and slammed her bag into the bin, jostling Jordan's backpack aggressively. She sat down in 2B directly next to Jordan and immediately pressed the call button. "Champagne," she barked when Sarah arrived. "And a wet wipe. This armrest feels sticky." It wasn't sticky. Jordan had watched the cleaning crew sanitize it. She pulled her hood up, retreating into her music. She just wanted to sleep. For the first 2 hours, the flight was uneventful. Jordan slept fitfully, waking up only when the turbulence light dinged or when Mrs. Sterling loudly berated the staff for the temperature of her filet mignon. Then the chaos started. Jordan was jolted awake by a shriek right next to her ear. "It's gone! Oh my God, it's gone!" Jordan blinked, disoriented. Tricia Sterling was standing up frantically, patting down her blazer, her skirt, and ripping the cushion off her seat. "Ma'am, what's wrong?" Sarah, the flight attendant, rushed over. "My bracelet!" Tricia screamed, her voice hitting a pitch that made several passengers in the back rows stand up to look. "The diamond tennis bracelet, the one my husband bought me in Zurich. I took it off to put on lotion, set it right here on the tray table, and now it's gone." The cabin went silent. "Are you sure you didn't put it in your bag?" "Mrs. Sterling," Sarah asked soothingly. "I am not senile," Tricia snapped. "I laid it right here. I closed my eyes for 10 minutes. She spun around, her eyes wild, scanning the floor. Then her gaze locked on Jordan. Jordan felt her stomach drop. The look in the woman's eyes wasn't just panic, it was predatory. "Her," Tricia whispered, pointing a manicured finger at Jordan's chest. "Ma'am," Sarah started. "She's been eyeing it since I sat down." Tricia yelled, her voice gaining confidence as other passengers began to murmur. "Look at her. Does she look like she belongs here? She's wearing a hoodie that looks like she pulled it out of a dumpster. She stole my diamond bracelet." Jordan's heart hammered against her ribs. "I didn't touch your bracelet. I was sleeping." "Sleeping or faking it?" Tricia lunged forward, grabbing Jordan's backpack from under the seat before Jordan could react. "Hey, don't touch my stuff," Jordan shouted, reaching for her bag. "She's attacking me! Help! She's attacking me!" Tricia screamed, clutching the backpack to her chest like a shield. That was the moment the man in seat 4C stood up. He had been reading a magazine, ignoring the commotion, until the physical struggle began. He was a large man, built like a refrigerator, with a buzz cut and a face that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite. He walked up the aisle with a heavy, authoritative stride. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a badge, flashing it quickly but effectively. "Federal Air Marshal," he announced, his voice booming. "Everyone sit down, now." Jordan sank back into her seat, relieved. A federal officer. He would sort this out. He would see that this crazy lady was stealing her bag. The marshal, whose nameplate read Officer Clint Rader, looked at Tricia, who was hyperventilating, and then he turned his cold, hard eyes onto Jordan. He didn't look at her like a protector. He looked at her like a target. "Officer!" Tricia gasped, playing the victim with Oscar-worthy dedication. "Thank God. This thug stole my jewelry and then tried to assault me." When I confronted her, Rader looked at the terrified 16-year-old girl. He saw the oversized hoodie. He saw the dark skin. He saw the expensive noise-cancelling headphones and assumed they were stolen too. He didn't see a child. He saw a stereotype. "Stand up," Rader commanded, his hand hovering near his waist. "I didn't do anything," Jordan said, her voice trembling. "She took my bag. That's my property." "I said, stand up," Rader barked. He didn't wait for her to comply. He reached over the armrest, grabbed Jordan by the bicep, and hauled her out of the seat with enough force to bruise. "Ow, you're hurting me," Jordan cried out. "Stop resisting," Rader said automatically, twisting her arm behind her back. "She's a minor," Sarah, the flight attendant, interjected, stepping between them. "Officer Rader, she is an unaccompanied minor. You can't handle her like that. We haven't even looked for the bracelet yet." Rader glared at Sarah. "Interfering with a federal investigation is a felony, sweetheart. Back off. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I know a thief when I see one." He pushed Jordan against the bulkhead wall near the cockpit door. The humiliation was burning Jordan's face. Every pair of eyes in first class was on her. Some looked sympathetic, but most looked relieved that the threat was being neutralized. "Empty your pockets," Rader ordered. "I want to call my dad," Jordan said, fighting back tears. "I have a right to call my dad." "You don't have rights right now," Rader sneered. "You're in the air under my jurisdiction, and right now you're a suspect in a grand larceny case. That bracelet is worth more than your life." "I didn't take it," Jordan pleaded. "Then where is it?" Tricia Sterling chimed in, rummaging through Jordan's backpack, which she had dumped onto seat 2B. "It's not in her bag. She must have it on her." "Check her pockets. Strip search her if you have to. Mrs. Sterling, stop going through her personal belongings," Sarah shouted finally, losing her professional cool. She tried to grab the backpack, but Tricia slapped her hand away. "I am the victim here," Tricia screeched. Raider turned his back on Trisha's illegal search and focused solely on Jordan. "Turn around. Hands on the wall." "No," Jordan said, a sudden spark of her father's steel entering her spine. "I didn't do anything. I won't be treated like a criminal." Raider's face turned a shade of violent red. He wasn't used to compliance issues, especially not from teenagers who looked like Jordan. "Listen to me, you little punk. I can make sure you land in a juvenile detention center before your feet even touch the ground. Now turn around." He grabbed her shoulder and spun her around forcefully. He patted her down aggressively, pockets, waist, ankles. Nothing. He checked the hoodie pocket. Just a phone and a boarding pass. Raider paused, frustration mounting. He looked at Trisha. "It's not on her." "She hid it," Trisha insisted. "She must have passed it to someone, or swallowed it, or stuck it in the seat cushions." Raider looked at the seat. He ripped the cushion off 2A. He checked the floor. He checked the overhead bin. The bracelet was nowhere. Logic dictated that the bracelet had fallen into a crevices, or perhaps Trisha had misplaced it. But Raider's ego was already committed. He had publicly manhandled a teenager. If he was wrong, he looked like a bully. If she was guilty, he was a hero. He needed her to be guilty. "She probably flushed it," Raider said, inventing a scenario to justify his aggression. "Went to the bathroom and flushed it to get rid of the evidence." "I haven't left my seat in 3 hours," Jordan protested. "Liar," Raider said. He pulled a pair of zip-tie cuffs from his pocket. "Jordan Banks, I am detaining you for theft and disorderly conduct aboard an aircraft." "You can't be serious," a man in row 3 spoke up. He was wearing a suit and glasses. "She hasn't moved. I've been watching. The lady next to her is the one who's been jumping around." "Sit down and shut up or you're next," Raider threatened the witness. The man sat back down, cowed. Raider cinched the plastic cuffs around Jordan's wrists tight. Too tight. "This is a mistake," Jordan whispered, tears finally spilling over. "My dad. He's going to be so angry." Raider laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "Let me guess. Your dad's a lawyer, or maybe he knows people." "Save it. I've heard it 1,000 times from street rats like you. Your dad can come pick you up at the precinct if he manages to make bail." Jordan looked at him. Her dark eyes filled with a terrifying calmness that Raider was too arrogant to recognize. "My dad isn't a lawyer," she said quietly. "He's the one the lawyers are afraid of." Raider ignored her. He shoved her back into seat 2A, forcing her to sit with her hands bound behind her back for the remaining 2 hours of the flight. He sat in the aisle seat, blocking her in acting as her jailer. Beside them, Trisha Sterling smirked, sipping a fresh glass of champagne. "Justice is served," she toasted. Neither of them noticed that Sarah, the flight attendant, had slipped into the galley. Her hands were shaking as she picked up the interphone to call the cockpit. "Captain," Sarah said, her voice trembling, "we have a code red situation in the cabin. Marshal Raider has detained a minor. It looks bad, Cap. Really bad. And the girl, I checked the manifest. Her last name is Banks, as in Harrison Banks." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Did you say Harrison Banks?" the pilot asked, his voice dropping an octave. "The federal judge, the one who just presided over the reform of the entire Air Marshal Service last month?" "Yes, sir," Sarah whispered. "Oh God," the pilot said. "Does Raider know?" "No, and he's not listening to anyone." "Call the ground," the pilot ordered immediately. "Get to the airport police, the station manager, and get a direct line to Judge Banks's security detail. Tell them we have a hostage situation. Because if Raider drags that girl off this plane in cuffs, this airline won't exist by tomorrow morning. The descent into Los Angeles was smooth for the plane, but turbulent for Jordan. Her shoulders screamed in pain from the angle of her arms. Her wrists were chafed raw by the plastic ties. She hadn't been given water. She hadn't been allowed to use the restroom. Raider sat next to her, filling out paperwork, looking smug. He was already drafting his report using words like combative, suspicious behavior, and probable cause. He was building a narrative that would cover his tracks. "Almost there," Raider said as the wheels touched down. "Don't worry, the LAPD will give you a nice ride. The back of their cars is about as comfortable as you're used to, I bet." Jordan didn't respond. She was staring out the window. She saw the familiar landscape of LAX. She saw the baggage carts. And then, as the plane taxied toward the gate, she saw something else. Usually a plane pulls up to the jet bridge, the engines cut and people deplane. Not this time. The plane stopped short of the gate out on the tarmac. "Why are we stopping?" Tricia asked, looking up from her magazine. "I have a connection to make." Raider frowned. Pilot probably lost his cue. Typical. But then flashing lights reflected off the cabin ceiling. Blue and red. A lot of them. Jordan looked out the window and saw a fleet of black SUVs swarming the tarmac. Not police cruisers. These were government vehicles. Suburbans with tinted windows and government plates. "Looks like you're getting a welcoming committee," Raider joked, though a flicker of confusion crossed his face. "Must be a VIP on board." The captain's voice came over the intercom. It sounded strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have been ordered by federal authorities to hold on the tarmac. Do not stand up. Do not open overhead bins." "Federal authorities," Tricia whispered. "Is it a terrorist?" Raider stood up, adjusting his jacket. "Stay here," he told Jordan. "I need to go brief the ground team on the arrest." He walked toward the cockpit door, flashing his badge to Sarah. "Open the door. I need to talk to the extraction team." "Sit down, Raider," Sarah said. Her voice was icy. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She knew what was coming. "Excuse me." Raider stepped closer, his physical intimidation tactics flaring up. Suddenly, the main cabin door, the one leading to the outside, was opened from the outside. The stairs had been rolled up. Raider turned, expecting uniformed LAPD officers to come in and take custody of the thief. Instead, 4 men in dark tactical suits entered. They wore vests that said DHS, Internal Affairs. Behind them walked a man in a tailored charcoal suit. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair, and a presence that made the air in the cabin feel heavier. He didn't look angry. He looked like the calm before a nuclear winter. Raider blinked. He recognized the man. Everyone in law enforcement recognized the man. It was the Honorable Harrison Banks, Chief Judge of the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals. The man known in the press as the Hammer for his ruthless dismantling of corruption cases, and he was walking straight toward first class. Raider's throat went dry. Coincidence, he thought frantically. He must be on the flight. He must be the VIP. "Judge Banks," Raider said, putting on his professional smile and stepping forward to shake hands. "Honor to meet you. I'm Federal Air Marshal Clint Raider. We have a situation under control here, just a minor theft suspect." Harrison Banks didn't even look at Raider. He walked right past the marshal, as if he were a ghost. Harrison went straight to seat 2A. He saw the teenager huddled in the corner. He saw the plastic zip ties biting into her wrists. He saw the tear tracks on her cheeks. The entire cabin watched in stunned silence as the terrifying Judge Banks dropped to one knee. "Geordie," he said, his voice breaking. "Daddy," Jordan whispered. "They said I stole a bracelet. I didn't." Harrison Banks looked at the zip ties. His jaw tightened so hard, a muscle feathered in his cheek. He stood up slowly and turned around. The look he gave Clint Rader could have peeled paint off the walls. "Who?" Harrison said, his voice quiet and deadly. "Put these on my daughter." The silence in the first-class cabin was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room, leaving only the sound of Clint Rader's career dying a violent death. Rader looked at the judge. He looked at the girl in the hoodie. He looked back at the judge. The pieces slammed together in his mind with the force of a physical blow. "Judge Banks," Rader stammered, his voice suddenly thin-stripped of its usual bravado. I had no idea. She didn't have identification. She refused to cooperate, given the accusations from another passenger." "Did you ask for her identification?" Harrison Banks asked. His voice was terrifyingly level. It was the voice he used when sentencing a man to life without parole. "Did you follow procedure, Marshal, or did you see a 16-year-old black girl in a hoodie and decide you didn't need procedure?" "Sir, with all due respect, the situation was volatile. I made a judgment call based on probable cause." Rader tried to pivot to his training script, but the words tasted like ash. Harrison ignored him. He nodded to one of the tactical agents behind him. "Agent Miller, cut those things off my daughter." "Wait a minute." Rader instinctively stepped forward, his hand twitching toward his belt. "She is a suspect in a federal investigation. You cannot just interfere with custody." The two other DHS Internal Affairs agents moved so fast, they were a blur. Before Rader could finish his sentence, they were on either side of him. One of them, a woman with eyes like flint, placed a hand firmly on Rader's chest, pushing him back against the galley wall. "Marshal Rader," she said sharply, "you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Keep your hands where we can see them." "You can't do this. I am the ranking officer on this aircraft," Rader shouted, panic finally setting in. "Not anymore," Harrison said. He helped Jordan stand up as Agent Miller snipped the thick plastic zip ties. Jordan gasped as the blood rushed back into her numb hands. Her wrists were ringed with angry red welts where the plastic had bitten into her skin. Harrison gently took her hands, inspecting the damage. The sight of the welts on his child's skin seemed to break something inside the judge. He turned slowly to face Rader. The look in his eyes was primeval. "You hurt her," Harrison whispered. "She was resisting," Rader cried, looking around for support, but finding only the hostile stares of the passengers and the cold professionalism of the IA agents. Tricia Sterling, realizing the tide had turned violently against her, tried to salvage her position. "Judge or no judge," she announced, her voice shaking slightly. "That girl still stole my diamond bracelet, and I demand it back. I don't care who her father is. A thief is a thief." Harrison looked at Tricia as if she were a stain on the carpet. "And you are Mrs. Sterling, I presume, the complainant?" "Yes, I am, and I am the victim here," Tricia insisted, clutching her Chanel bag. "We'll see about that," Harrison said. He turned to Sarah, the flight attendant, who was watching with tearful relief from the galley. "Sarah, is it? Did you witness the alleged theft?" "No, sir," Sarah said firmly. Jordan was asleep. Mrs. Sterling was up and down the whole flight. When she claimed the bracelet was missing, she immediately accused Jordan without looking for it. "Liar!" Tricia shrieked. "Agent Miller!" Harrison barked. "Secure this cabin. No one leaves. We are going to conduct a real search, and Marshal Raider, get him off my plane before I forget that I am an officer of the court." As the agents disarmed Raider, taking his gun and his badge in full view of the passengers, he had terrorized Jordan leaned into her father's shoulder. "I was so scared, Dad," she whispered. "He wouldn't let me call you." Harrison kissed the top of her head, his grip tight. "I know, baby. I know. But it's over now. I'm here. And I promise you the man who did this is going to wish he had never stepped foot on an airplane." The aircraft was evacuated of all passengers except for Tricia, Sterling, Jordan, Harrison, and the law enforcement personnel. The air conditioning hummed in the empty metal tube, amplifying the tension. Clint Raider had been escorted off the plane in handcuffs, a delicious irony that wasn't lost on anyone. He was currently sitting in the back of one of the DHS Suburbans, watching his 20-year career dissolve through tinted glass. On board, the search began. This wasn't Raider's frantic accusatory thrashing. This was a systematic forensic sweep conducted by DHS agents who knew exactly what they were doing. They checked the seats. They checked the floor tracks. They checked the lavatories. Tricia Sterling sat in 2B, fuming, her arms crossed. "This is ridiculous. She obviously passed it off to someone else before you got it here. Well, she swallowed it. You should be X-raying her, not searching the floor." "Mrs. Sterling, be quiet." Agent Miller said, his patience wearing thin. "You've done enough damage today." Jordan sat in 2A, holding her father's hand. She was exhausted, but the fear was receding, replaced by a simmering anger. She watched as the agents dismantled the area where she had been held prisoner for hours. "Judge Banks," Sarah, the flight attendant, approached tentatively. "I just remembered something. When Mrs. Sterling first sat down, she was very aggressive with her belongings. She slammed her carry-on into the overhead bin quite hard." Harrison nodded. "Check the bin," he ordered Agent Miller. Miller grabbed a stepping stool and climbed up to inspect the overhead compartment above row 2. It was empty now, the bags having been removed. He used a high-powered flashlight, sweeping the corners. He paused. He reached into the far back corner of the bin, where the hinge mechanism for the door was located. "Got something?" Miller muttered. He wiggled his fingers, trying to dislodge something caught in the metal track. With a soft clink, it came free. Agent Miller climbed down and held up his gloved hand. Dangling from his fingers, glittering under the cabin lights, was a platinum diamond tennis bracelet. The silence that fell over the cabin was heavier than anything before. Tricia Sterling stared at the bracelet, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. All the color drained from her face, leaving her makeup looking stark and clownish. It must have fallen off when I put my bag up," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Fallen off." Harrison Banks let go of Jordan's hand and took a step toward Tricia. His presence filled the aisle. "You told the air marshal you placed it on your tray table. You told him you saw my daughter eyeing it. You explicitly stated that she stole it while you were sleeping." I was confused. I was panicked, Tricia stammered, shrinking back into her seat. "No, Mrs. Sterling," Harrison said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You weren't panicked. You were prejudiced. You saw a black teenager in a hoodie, and you decided she was a criminal. You didn't lose your bracelet. You weaponized it. You used it as an excuse to inflict trauma on a child because you didn't think she belonged in your world." He turned to Agent Miller. "Read her rights." "What?" Tricia shrieked, clutching her pearls. "You can't be serious. I found my bracelet. It was just a mistake." "Filing a false report with a federal officer is a felony," Harrison stated coldly. Interfering with the duties of a flight crew is a felony. Assaulting a minor, which you did when you grabbed her backpack, is a felony. You didn't make a mistake, Mrs. Sterling. You committed a crime. As Agent Miller pulled out his handcuffs, real metal ones this time, Tricia began to sob uncontrollably. It wasn't the cry of a victim. It was the cry of a bully who had finally picked on the wrong person. Jordan watched as the woman who had tortured her for 4 hours was led away in cuffs. She didn't feel triumphant. She just felt tired. "Come on, Geordie," Harrison said, gently wrapping his arm around her. "Let's go home." The holding room at LAX was a soulless box of cinder block and industrial linoleum designed to break the spirit of whoever was inside. It smelled of stale coffee, aggressive floor cleaner, and nervous sweat. Clint Rader sat at the bolted-down metal table, a position he had watched hundreds of suspects take over his 20-year career. But this time the view was different. He was stripped of his blazer, his tie, his belt, and his shoelaces standard suicide prevention protocol, but it felt like a deliberate humiliation. The handcuffs were on cinched tight enough to remind him of every minute that passed. For the first 20 minutes, Rader leaned back in the chair, feigning nonchalance. He told himself this was just a bureaucratic hiccup. He was a federal air marshal. He was the good guy. The blue wall would hold. It always held. He'd make a few calls, claim the girl was being belligerent, cite flight safety protocols, and walk out with a slap on the wrist. Maybe a week of desk duty. He was mentally rehearsing his statement. The subject exhibited erratic behavior, consistent with a security threat, when the heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. Rader straightened up, expecting his union rep, or maybe a sympathetic supervisor. Instead, 2 men walked in, sucking the oxygen right out of the room. The first was Assistant Director Miller from DHS Internal Affairs. Rader knew him by reputation, only a man who didn't hunt terrorists, but hunted bad agents. Miller was holding a thick manila file under his arm like a weapon. The second man was Harrison Banks. Seeing the judge in person was different than seeing him on the plane. On the tarmac, he had been a worried father. Now, in the stark, fluorescent light of the interrogation room, he was something else entirely. He was the Hammer. He wore his charcoal suit like armor, and his eyes were void of any warmth, mercy, or humanity. He didn't look at Rader with anger. He looked at him with the clinical detachment of an exterminator, looking at a cockroach. Miller sat down opposite Rader. Harrison remained standing, leaning against the wall near the door, arms crossed, watching. "Marshal Rader." Miller began, his voice dry and devoid of pleasantries. He placed a digital recorder on the table and pressed a button. "This interview is being recorded. You have been read your rights. Do you understand them?" "I know the drill." "Miller," Rader scoffed, trying to summon his usual bravado. "Look, can we cut the theater? I made a judgment call in the field at 30,000 feet. I had a hysterical complainant and an uncooperative subject. I secured the threat. That's the job." Miller didn't respond. He slowly opened the file folder. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. "A judgment call," Miller repeated flatly. He pulled out a sheet of paper. "We have the sworn statements from the entire flight crew. Flight attendant Sarah Jenkins states that you initiated physical contact with the minor while she was seated and non-combative. She states you refused to verify the minor's identity, despite being told she was an unaccompanied minor. She states you used proficient profanity and derogatory language." "She's lying," Rader snapped. "She was emotional. Civilians don't understand threat assessment. We also have statements from 6 first-class passengers." Miller continued, ignoring the interruption. They all corroborate Ms. Jenkins' account. One passenger, a Mr. David Chen, provided us with this. Miller spun a tablet around on the table. He pressed play. Raider watched his stomach turning to ice. It was a video. The angle was from row 4. It showed Raider looming over Jordan. The audio was crystal clear. "Listen to me, you little punk. I can make sure you land in a juvenile detention center. Your dad can come pick you up at the precinct if he manages to make bail. Then the physical escalation. The video showed Raider yanking Jordan up by her arm with unnecessary violence, twisting her wrist and shoving her against the bulkhead while she cried out in pain." Miller paused the video on a frame of Raider's face, twisted in a sneer of pure bullying. "Is that standard threat assessment, Marshal?" Miller asked quietly. "Calling a 16-year-old girl a punk, taunting her about her father's ability to make bail." Raider swallowed hard. His throat felt like it was filled with sand. I was trying to establish dominance, to control the situation." "You were enjoying it," a deep voice cut in from the corner. Harrison Banks pushed off the wall and walked slowly towards the table. He moved with a predator's grace. He placed his hands on the back of Miller's chair and leaned in, staring directly into Raider's eyes. "I've spent 30 years in courtrooms," Harrison said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I've watched murderers lie. I've watched cartel bosses smile at the jury. I know what a man looks like when he's doing a job, and I know what a man looks like when he's getting off on his own power." Harrison reached into the file and pulled out a glossy 8x10 photograph. He slammed it onto the table in front of Raider. It was a close-up of Jordan's wrists. The skin was broken. Deep, angry purple welts circled her delicate arms where the zip ties had cut off her circulation. "Look at it," Harrison commanded. Raider tried to look away. "I said, look at it." Harrison roared, the sound echoing off the concrete walls like a gunshot. Raider flinched, his eyes darting to the photo. "That is my daughter," Harrison hissed, leaning down until his face was inches from Raider's. "She plays the cello. She's on the honor roll. She has never been in a fight in her life. And you treated her like an animal because you didn't like her hoodie. You saw a black child in first class, and your small, bigoted brain couldn't process it, so you decided to break her." "I am not a bigot," Raider shouted, his face reddening. "I was doing my job." "She fit the description given by the complainant. The complainant who is currently being booked into federal custody for filing a false report," Miller interjected smoothly. "We found the bracelet, Clint. It was in the overhead bin. If you had done a basic search instead of eager beavering to arrest a teenager, you would have found it in 10 seconds. Raider slumped in his chair. The "I found the bracelet" defense was gone. The "she was resisting" defense was dead on video. "Here is what is going to happen," Harrison said, straightening up and buttoning his jacket. He spoke with the absolute finality of a verdict. "Assistant Director Miller is going to process you, but you aren't just getting fired, Clint. I don't want you to have any illusions about that." Harrison began to count off on his fingers. Title 18, U.S. Code Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. That's a felony. Kidnapping because once you held her without probable cause, that's what it became. Assault on a minor. Child endangerment. Raider's breathing became ragged. You can't pin all that on me. I have a clean record." Miller cleared his throat. "Actually, about that. Judge Banks asked us to dig a little deeper into your clean record." Miller pulled out a second stack of papers. 3 previous complaints in the last 5 years, all involving minority passengers, all dismissed for lack of evidence. One was a 70-year-old grandmother you detained for suspicious walking. Another was a doctoral student you claimed was eyeing the cockpit. We are reopening all of them. We're going to audit every arrest you've ever made. Raider felt the floor drop out from under him. They weren't just prosecuting this case. They were dismantling his entire life. My pension, Raider whispered, his voice trembling. I have 20 years. I have a mortgage. My kids start college soon. Harrison Banks looked at him, and for a second, Raider hoped for mercy. He hoped for a man-to-man understanding. You should have thought about your kids when you were bruising mine, Harrison said coldly. Your pension is gone. It will be stripped as part of your dishonorable discharge. Your savings will be gone after you pay for your defense attorneys, who, by the way, are going to lose. And your house, you better hope your wife can pay the mortgage on a single income, because you are going to be a guest of the federal prison system for a very long time. Raider looked at the IA agent, desperate. Miller, come on. We're on the same team. You can't let him do this. It's a witch hunt. Miller stood up, gathering the files. He looked at Raider with pure disgust. We aren't on the same team, Raider. You're the reason people hate us. You're the reason people are scared to fly. You aren't a cop anymore. You're just a criminal who hasn't been sentenced yet. Miller nodded to the guard at the door. Take him to holding. General population. General Pop. Raider's eyes widened in terror. You can't put a Fed in General Pop, they'll kill me. Then I guess you better learn to keep your head down and follow the rules, Harrison said, turning toward the door. Karma is a funny thing, Mr. Raider. You spent today acting like a tough guy, bullying a child. Now you get to go to a place where there are real tough guys. Let's see how your dominance holds up in there. Harrison opened the door, letting the sounds of the busy precinct drift in. He paused and looked back one last time. Oh, and Clint. When you're sitting in that cell tonight, wondering how it all went wrong, remember one thing. You didn't lose your life because of politics. You didn't lose it because of me. You lost it because you looked at my daughter and saw a nobody. And that nobody just ended you. Harrison walked out the door, slamming shut behind him, with a heavy metallic clang that sounded exactly like the lid of a coffin closing. Clint Raider was left alone in the silence. He looked at his hands, the hands that had held the badge, the gun, the power. Now they were just empty, shaking hands in cheap handcuffs. He put his head down on the cold metal table and let out a sob that no one was there to hear. The hard karma hadn't just hit back. It had buried him. The fallout wasn't a ripple. It was a tsunami. By the time Harrison Banks's motorcade pulled out of LAX, whisking a traumatized Jordan away to safety, the internet had already done what the internet does best. It had found the truth, and it was angry. A passenger in row 4, a tech entrepreneur named David, had discreetly filmed the entire confrontation. He hadn't intervened because of Rada's gun, but he had captured everything the way Raider yanked Jordan from her seat. Like a rag doll, the sneer in his voice and the terrifying image of a 16-year-old girl being slammed against the bulkhead. He uploaded the video to Twitter with the caption, "Just watched a federal air marshal assault a kid over a stolen bracelet that was in the accuser's bag the whole time. You won't believe who her dad is." Within 3 hours, the video had 12 million views. The hashtag #HeartFireRaider was trending worldwide, followed closely by #Airline Karen, the collapse of Trisha Sterling. For Trisha Sterling, the karma hit with the speed of a guillotine. She was released on bail the next morning, shielding her face from a phalanx of paparazzi that had camped out in front of the precinct. She thought she could retreat to the sanctuary of her gated community in Bel Air to wait for her high-powered lawyers to make this misunderstanding go away. She was wrong. When she arrived home, the gates to her driveway were open. Her husband's car, a pristine Aston Martin, was gone. She walked into the foyer of her mansion, dropping her Chanel bag on the floor, the same bag that had started this entire nightmare. The house was quiet. Too quiet. "Richard," she called out, her voice raspy from crying in the holding cell. There was no answer. Instead, she found a large manila envelope on the marble kitchen island. Next to it was a note. Trisha, the board, called an emergency meeting at 4:30 a.m. The video is everywhere. They didn't just ask me to step down. They demanded my resignation to save the stock price. The sterling name is toxic. I cannot have my family associated with what you did. My lawyers will be in touch regarding the divorce. Do not contact me. Ah. Trisha crumpled the note, her hands shaking. She grabbed her phone to call her best friend Linda, a woman she had lunched with every Tuesday for 10 years. Call declined. She tried her sister. Straight to voicemail. She opened her social media. Her Instagram, usually filled with comments praising her lifestyle, was a war zone. Thousands of comments, tens of thousands of DMs, all spewing vitriol. People had found her charity board memberships and bombarded the organizations until they posted public statements severing ties with her. Trisha Sterling slid down the kitchen cabinets until she hit the floor. She sat there in the silence of her empty mansion, realizing that her diamond bracelet hadn't been stolen, but it had cost her everything she actually owned. She was rich, yes, but she was entirely, devastatingly alone. The destruction of Clint Rader. If Trisha's life was imploding, Clint Rader's was being systematically dismantled by the United States government. Harrison Banks hadn't been bluffing. He didn't just want Rader fired. He wanted him erased. Rader sat in an interrogation room across from a federal prosecutor who looked like a shark smelling blood. "Here is the deal, Mr. Rader," the prosecutor said, sliding a document across the table. "You are looking at charges for deprivation of rights under color of law, false imprisonment, and assault on a minor. The judge and I don't think I need to tell you which judge has made it clear that he will personally review every plea deal we offer." Rader looked at the paper. "I have a pension. I have 20 years of service." "You have nothing," the prosecutor corrected him coldly. "The DHS has disavowed you. The Air Marshal Service has issued a statement condemning your actions as rogue behavior. Your union rep isn't even returning your calls." Rader went home that night to a dark apartment. His wife had taken the kids to her mother's in Ohio. She had left a message saying she couldn't explain to their son why his father was the bad man on the news. He turned on the TV, hoping to find some pundit defending him, someone talking about security protocols or tough jobs. Instead, he saw a panel of experts dissecting his body language, pointing out the sadism in the way he had tightened the zip ties. He poured himself a drink, his hand trembling. He had spent his career bullying people he thought were weak. He had spent his life thinking the badge made him untouchable. Now, stripped of the badge, he realized he was just a small, cruel man who was about to spend a very long time in a very small cell. The healing. 2 weeks later, the media storm was still raging, but the silence at the Banks' residence was heavy and different. Jordan hadn't left the house. She spent her days in the library, reading the same pages over and over, or staring out at the pool without seeing it. She had nightmares. In them, the plane was crashing, but she couldn't move because her hands were tied. She would wake up gasping, clutching her wrists, feeling the phantom bite of the plastic. Harrison watched her from the doorway. his heart breaking a little more every day. He had won the legal battle. Raider was indicted. Trisha was facing jail time. But he couldn't litigate the fear out of his daughter's eyes. One evening, he found her sitting on the terrace wrapped in a blanket despite the warm California breeze. He walked over and sat on the chaise lounge next to her. "I spoke to the DA today," Harrison said softly. "Raider is pleading guilty. He wants to avoid a trial. He's going to get 7 years. Jordan didn't look up. "That's good, I guess." "And Mrs. Sterling," Harrison continued, "she's taking a plea for filing a false report. She'll do 6 months in federal prison plus community service and probation, and she's being sued by the airline for the cost of the diversion." Jordan nodded slowly, but her expression remained flat. Harrison sighed. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Geordie, look at me." She turned her head. Her eyes, usually so bright and full of mischief, looked tired. "I know you're still scared," he said. "I'm not scared, Dad," Jordan said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm angry. I'm angry that it happened, and I feel guilty." "Guilty?" Harrison frowned. "Why on earth would you feel guilty? You didn't do anything." "I feel guilty because I'm safe," Jordan said, the tears finally spilling over. "I feel guilty because the only reason those people are being punished is because of who you are. If I was anyone else, if I was just a girl from the neighborhood, Raider would still have his job. Trisha would be drinking champagne, and I would be in jail." She wiped her eyes furiously. "It's not fair, Dad. It's not fair that I needed a Harrison Banks to be treated like a human being." Harrison was silent for a long moment. He looked out at the city lights of Los Angeles, a sprawling grid of millions of people, millions of stories. He knew she was right. It was the hard, ugly truth that he had spent his life trying to fight within the courtroom, but had never felt as acutely as he did now. He moved from his chair to sit next to her, pulling her into a tight embrace. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing the way she used to when she was 5 years old, and scraped her knee. "You are right," Harrison whispered into her hair. "It isn't fair. It is the most unfair thing in the world." He pulled back so he could look her in the eyes. "But that is exactly why you can't let this break you. You have seen the ugly side of the world, Jordan. You have stared it right in the face. And yeah, my name got you out of that seat. But your dignity, your calmness, your truth, that's what exposed them." Harrison took a deep breath, his voice becoming firmer, the hammer returning, but tempered with love. "We can't change what happened on that plane, but we can decide what we do with it. You say it's unfair that other people don't have a voice, then we use ours. I'm starting a foundation, Jordan, for legal defense, specifically for cases of profiling in transit, and I want you to help me run it, when you're ready." Jordan sniffled, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her shirt. "Really?" "Really," Harrison said. "We make sure that the next time a Clint Raider tries to bully someone, they don't need a Harrison Banks to save them. They'll have us." A small, tentative smile touched Jordan's lips. It wasn't a full smile, but it was a start. The shadows in her eyes receded just a fraction. "Okay," she whispered. "I'd like that." Harrison kissed her forehead. "Good. Now how about we go inside? I think there's some ice cream in the freezer, with our names on it." As they walked back into the house, leaving the darkness of the terrace behind them, the night felt a little less oppressive. The scars would fade, but the lesson would remain. They had walked through the fire, and now they were going to make sure no one else had to burn. The corrupt had fallen. The innocent had risen. And somewhere in a sterile prison cell, Clint Rader was realizing that the hardest karma of all isn't just getting caught. It's watching your victim become stronger than you ever were. Jordan Banks walked off that plane, but a part of her innocence was left behind in seat 2A. The scars on her wrists healed, but the memory of being targeted for how she looked by those sworn to protect would last forever. Trisha Sterling and Clint Rader learned a devastating lesson. Power isn't about loud voices or shiny badges. Real power is the truth, and when it hits harder than any pair of handcuffs. They thought they were dealing with a nobody. They ended up facing a force of nature. If this story made your blood boil, if you believe that justice shouldn't depend on who your father is, hit that like button. Share this video to expose the reality that so many face every day. And subscribe for more stories that speak truth to power. Thanks for watching.